9. And again the day began with a din of voices. Rodion was gloomily giving instructions, and 3 other attendants were assisting him. The entire family of Marth had arrived for the interview, bringing with them all their furniture. Not thus had he imagined this long-awaited meeting. How they lumbered in! Marth's aged father, with his huge bald head and bags under his eyes and the rubbery top of his black cane. Marth's brothers, identical twins except that one had a golden mustache and the other a pitch-black one. Marth's maternal grandparents, so old that one could already see through them. 3 vivacious female cousins who, however, were not admitted for some reason at the last minute. Marth's children, lame Diomedon and obese little Pauline, at last Marth herself, wearing her best black dress and a velvet ribbon around her cold white neck, and holding a hand mirror. A very proper young man with a flawless profile was constantly at her side. The father-in-law, leaning on his stick, seated himself in a leather armchair that arrived with him, with an effort to put a fat suede foot up on the stool, and angrily shaking his head, fixed his gaze from beneath heavy eyelids on Cincinnatus, who felt the familiar dull sensation at the sight of frogs ornamenting the father-in-law's warm jacket, the folds around his mouth that seemed to express eternal disgust, and the purple blotch of a birthmark on his corded temple, with a swelling resembling a big raisin right on the vein. The grandfather and grandmother, the one all shaky and shriveled in patched trousers, the other with her white hair bobbed, and so slim that she might have encased herself in a silk umbrella sheath, settled side by side in 2 identical high-backed chairs, the grandfather tightly clutched in his small hirsute hands a bulky portrait, and a gilt frame of his mother, a misty young woman, in turn holding a portrait. Meanwhile, furniture, household utensils, even individual sections of walls continued to arrive. There came a mirrored wardrobe, bringing with it its own private reflection, namely a corner of the connubial bedroom with a stripe of sunlight across the floor, a dropped glove, an open door in the distance, a cheerless little tricycle with an orthopedic attachment was rolled in. It was followed by the inlaid table, which had supported a flat garnet flagon and a hairpin for the last 10 years. Marth sat down on her black couch, embroidered with roses. "Whoa, whoa," proclaimed the father-in-law, striking the floor with his cane. Frightened little smiles appeared on the faces of the oldsters. "Don't, Daddy, we've been through it 1,000 times," Marth said quietly, and shrugged his chilly shoulder. Her young man offered her a fringed shawl, but she, forming the rudiment of a tender smile with one corner of her thin lips, waved away a sensitive hand. "The first thing I look at in a man is his hands." He was dressed in the smart black uniform of a telegraph employee and perfumed with violent scent. "Whoa," repeated the father-in-law forcefully, and began to curse Cincinnatus in detail and with relish. Cincinnatus's gaze was drawn to Pauline's green polka-dotted dress, red-haired, cross-eyed, bespeckled, arousing not laughter but sadness with those polka dots and the plumpness. Dully moving her fat legs in brown wool stockings and button shoes, she would approach those present and study each, gazing gravely and silently with her small dark eyes, which seemed to meet behind the bridge of her nose. The poor thing had a napkin tied around her neck. Evidently they had forgotten to take it off her after breakfast. The father-in-law paused to regain breath, then struck another blow with his cane, whereupon Cincinnatus said, "Yes, I am listening." "Silence, insolent fellow," shouted the former. "I am entitled to expect from you, if only today, when you stand at death's door, a little respect. How you managed to get yourself on the block. I want an explanation from you. How you dared." Martha asked her young man something in a low voice. He was carefully rummaging around, probing all around himself and under himself on the couch. No, it's all right," he answered just as softly. "I must have dropped it out of the way. Don't worry, it'll turn up. Tell me, are you sure you're not cold?" Shaking her head negatively, Martha lowered her soft palm onto his wrist, and taking her hand away immediately, she straightened her dress across her knees and in a harsh whisper called her son, who was bothering his uncles, who in turn kept pushing him away. He was preventing them from listening. Diomedon, in a gray blouse with an elastic at the hips, twisting his whole body in a rhythmic distortion, nevertheless quite rapidly covered the distance between him and his mother. His left leg was healthy and rosy, the right one resembled a rifle in its complicated harness, barrel, straps, and sling. His round hazel eyes and sparse eyebrows were his mother's, but the lower half of his face, with its bulging bulldog jowls, This, of course, was someone else's. "Sit here," whispered Martha, and with a quick slap arrested the hand mirror, which was trickling off the couch. "You tell me," the father-in-law was continuing, "how dared you? A happy family man, splendid furniture, wonderful children, a loving wife, how you dared not consider all this, you villain? It seems to me sometimes that I am no more than an old moron, and understand nothing, because otherwise I must allow for such loathsomeness. Silence!" he roared, and again the oldster stared and smiled. A black cat stretched, straining back one hind paw, rubbed itself against Cincinnatus's leg, and then was suddenly on the sideboard, and from there noiselessly leaped into the shoulder of the lawyer, who, having just tiptoed in, was sitting in a corner on a plush hassock. He had a bad cold, and over a handkerchief held ready for use, was inspecting the assembled company and the various household items that made the cell look like the site of an auction. The cat startled him, and he threw it off with a convulsive movement. The father-in-law was thundering on, multiplying curses, and already beginning to grow hoarse. Martha placed her hand over her eyes. Her young man, tensing his jaw muscles, was watching her. On a settee with a curved back sat Martha's brothers. The dark one, in a tawny suit and open shirt collar, was holding music paper rolled into a tube, and as yet bearing no music, he was one of the city's foremost singers. His twin, in his sky-blue plus-bores, a dandy and a wit, had brought a present for his brother-in-law, a bowl of bright fruit made of wax. He also fixed a crepe armband on his sleeve and kept indicating it with his finger as he tried to catch Cincinnatus's eye. At the peak of his eloquence, the father-in-law suddenly choked and gave his chair such a wrench that quiet little Pauline, who had been standing by him and looking at his mouth, toppled backwards behind the chair, where she lay still, hoping that nobody noticed. With a crackle, the father-in-law began opening a cigarette box. Everyone was quiet. The various trampled sounds began to straighten up. Martha's brother, the brunette, cleared his throat and softly began to sing Male Trano Tamesti. He stopped short and looked at his brother, who made terrible eyes at him. The lawyer, smiling at something, again applied himself to his handkerchief. On the couch, Martha was talking in a whisper with her escort, who was pleading with her to throw the shawl over herself. The prison air was a little damp. When they spoke, they used the formal second person plural, but with what a cargo of tenderness this second person plural was laden, it sailed along the horizon of their barely audible conversation. The little old man, trembling awfully, got up from his chair, handed the portrait to his old woman, and shielding the flame that was trembling like himself, went up to Cincinnatus's father-in-law and was going to light his, but the flame went out, and the latter frowned angrily. "You have really become a nuisance with your stupid lighter," said he glumly, but already without warmth. Then the atmosphere really grew animated, and everybody began talking simultaneously. "Malea tono temesti," Martha's brother sang in full voice. "Diomedes, leave the cat alone this instant," said Martha. "You already strangled one the other day, and one every day is too much. Take it away from him, please, Victor dear." Availing herself on the general animation, Pauline crawled out from behind the chair and quietly got up. The lawyer walked over to Cincinnatus's father-in-law and gave him a light. "Take the word anxiety," Cincinnatus's brother-in-law, the wit, was saying to him. "Now take away the word tiny, eh? Comes out funny, doesn't it?" "Yes, friend, you've really got yourself in a mess. In truth, what made you do such a thing?" Meanwhile, the door opened imperceptibly. Monsieur Pierre and the director stood on the threshold, hands clasped identically behind their backs, and quietly, delicately moving only their eyeballs, were examining the assemblage. They stood and looked like this for more than a minute before leaving. "Listen to me," the brother-in-law was saying, breathing hotly. "I'm your old pal. Do as I say. Repent, my little Cincinnatus. Come on, do me this favor. You don't know. They might still let you off, eh? Think how unpleasant it is to have your chump lopped off. What do you have to lose? Come on, don't be a blockhead." "Greetings, greetings, greetings," said the lawyer, coming over to Cincinnatus. "Don't embrace me. I still have a bad cold." "What is the conversation about? How can I be of service?" "Let me pass," murmured Cincinnatus. "I have to say a couple of words to my wife." "Now, my dearest, let us discuss the question of property," said the father-in-law, refreshed, and extended his cane in such a way that Cincinnatus tumbled over it. Wait a minute, I'm speaking to you." Cincinnatus kept going. He had to get round a large table set for 10 persons, and then squeezed between the screen and the wardrobe in order to reach Martha, who reclined on the couch. The young man had covered her feet with a shawl. Cincinnatus almost made it, but just then there was an angry shriek from Diomedon. He turned around and saw Emmy, who had entered in some unknown way and was now teasing the boy, imitating his lameness, and she was dragging one leg with various complicated contortions. Cincinnatus caught her by the arm, but she broke loose and ran off. Pauline waddled after her in a slight ecstasy of curiosity. Marthe turned to him. The young man very correctly stood up. "Marthe, just a couple of words, I beg you," said Cincinnatus rapidly. He tripped over the cushion and the floor and sat down awkwardly on the edge of the couch, at the same time wrapping his ash-smeared dressing-gown around himself. "A slight migraine," said the young man. "What can you expect? Such excitement is bad for him." "You are right," said Cincinnatus. "Yes, you are right. I should like to ask you, I must, in private." "I beg pardon, sir," said the voice of Rodion close to him. Cincinnatus stood up. Rodion and another employee, looking at each other in the eye, grasped the couch on which Marthe was reclining, grunted, picked it up, and carried it toward the door. "Goodbye, goodbye," Marthe called childishly, swaying in time with the step of her porters. But suddenly she closed her eyes and covered her face. Her escort walked solicitously behind, carrying the black shawl he had picked up from the floor, a bouquet, his uniform cap, and a solitary glove. There was a commotion all around. The brothers were packing the dishes in a trunk. Their father, breathing asthmatically, was overcoming a multi-segmented scream. The lawyer was offering everyone a vast sheet of wrapping paper obtained by him from some unknown source. He was seen unsuccessfully attempting to wrap it in a bowl containing a pale orange little fish in a cloud of water. Amid the commotion, the ample wardrobe with its private reflection stood like a pregnant woman, carefully holding and turning aside its glass belly so no one would brush against it. It was tilted backward, and in a reeling hug carried away. People were coming up to Cincinnatus to say goodbye. "Well, let's let bygones be bygones," said the father-in-law, and with cold politeness kissed Cincinnatus's hand, as custom demanded. The blond brother sat the dark one on the shoulders, and in that position they took leave of Cincinnatus and departed like a live mountain. The grandparents were shivering, bowing, and holding up the hazy portrait. The employees kept carrying out the furniture. The children approached. Solemn Pauline raised up her face. Diomedon, on the contrary, gazed down at the floor. The lawyer led them away by their respective hands. The last to fly up to him was Emmy, pale, tear-stained, her nose pink and her mouth wet and quivering. She was silent, but suddenly, with a slight crackle, she rose on her toes, twined both her hot arms around his neck, whispered incoherently, and uttered a loud sob. Rodion seized her by the wrist, judging by his grumbling he had been calling her for a long time, and now he dragged her firmly toward the exit, arching her body, turning toward Cincinnatus, her head with its streaming hair, and extending to him, palm upturned, her lovely arm, with the appearance of a ballet captive, but with a shadow of genuine despair. Emmy unwillingly followed Rodion as he dragged her. Her eyes kept rolling back, her shoulder straps slipped off, and now with a swinging motion, as though he were emptying a bucket, he splashed her out into the corridor. Then, still muttering, he returned with a dustpan to pick up the corpse of the cat that lay flat under the chair. The door slammed with a crash. It was now hard to believe that in this cell, only a moment ago, When the lone wolf cub gets better acquainted with my views, he will stop shying away from me. A certain amount of progress, however, has already been achieved, and I welcome it with all my heart, Monsieur Pierre was saying, seated sidewise to the table, as was his wont, his plump calves compactly crossed, and one hand playing soundless chords on the oilcloth. Cincinnatus, his head propped on his hand, lay on the cot. "We are alone now, and it's raining," went on Monsieur Pierre. "Such weather is ideal for intimate chit-chat. Let us settle once for all. I get the impression that you are surprised, even irritated by the administration's attitude toward me. It is as if I were in a privileged position." No, don't agree. Let us have it out. Allow me to tell you two things. You know our dear director. By the way, the wolf cub is not entirely fair to him, but we'll talk about that later. You know how impressionable he is, how enthusiastic, how is he carried away with every novelty. I think he must have been carried away with you the first 2 days. So the passion that now inflames him for me need not upset you. Let's not be so jealous, my friend. In the second place, strangely enough, you are evidently still unaware of why I ended up here, but when I tell you, there are many things you will understand. Excuse me. What is that you have on your neck, right here? Here, yes, here. Where? Cincinnatus asked mechanically, feeling his neck vertebrae. Monsieur went over to him and sat down on the edge of the cot. Right here, he said, but I see now that it was only a shadow. I thought I saw a little swelling of some kind. You seem uncomfortable when you move your head. Does it hurt? Did you catch a chill? Oh, stop pestering me, please, Cincinnati said sorrowfully. No, just a minute. My hands are clean. Allow me to feel here. It seems, after all, does it hurt here? How about here? With his small but muscular hand, he was rapidly touching Cincinnatus's neck and examining it carefully, breathing through the nose with a slight sweet wheeze. No, nothing. Everything is in order, he said at last, moving away and slapping the patient on the nape. Only you do have an awfully thin one. Otherwise, everything is normal. It's just that sometimes, you know. Let's see your tongue. The tongue is a mirror of the stomach. Cover up. It's chilly in here. What were we chatting about? Refresh my memory. If you are really interested in my welfare, said Cincinnatus, then you would leave me alone. Go away, please. You mean you really do not want to hear what I have to say, Monsieur Pierre objected with a smile. You really are so obstinately convinced that your conclusions are infallible. Conclusions that are unknown to me, mark that, unknown, lost in sadness. Cincinnatus said nothing. Allow me to tell you, though, Monsieur Pierre went on with certain solemnity. What was the nature of my crime? I was accused justly or not, that is a different matter. I was accused of what, do you suppose? Well, come on out with it, said Cincinnatus with a melancholy sigh. You will be amazed. I was accused of attempting to... Oh, ungrateful, distrustful friend, I was accused of attempting to help you escape from here. Is that true? Asked Cincinnatus. I never lie, Monsieur Pierre said imposingly. Perhaps there are times when one ought to lie, that is another matter, and perhaps such scrupulous veracity is foolish, and in the end does no good. That may all be so, but the fact remains I never lie. I ended up here, my fine friend, because of you. I was arrested at night. Where? Let us say in Upper Elderbury. Yes, I am an Elderburian. Salt works, fruit orchards. Should you ever want to come and call on me, I shall treat you to some of our elderberries. I assume no responsibility for the pun. It appears our city seal. They are not in the seal, but in the jail. Your obedient servant spent 3 days. Then they transferred me here. You mean you wanted to save me? Cincinnati said pensively. Whether I wanted to or not is my business, friend of my heart, cockroach under the hearth. In any case, I was accused of it. You know, informers are a young and hot-headed breed, and so here I am, here in rapture. I'm standing before you. Remember the song? The principal evidence against me was some sketch of this fortress that supposedly had my marks on it. You see, I was supposed to have thought out every last detail of your escape, my little cockroach. You were supposed to, or? Asked Cincinnatus. What a naive, delightful creature he is, grinned Monsieur Pierre, displaying a multitude of teeth. He wants everything to be so simple, as alas, never it is in real life. One would still like to know, said Cincinnatus, what, whether my judges were right? Whether I really was planning to save you? Shame, shame. Then it is true? Whispered Cincinnatus. Monsieur Pierre got up and began to walk about the cell. Let us leave the matter, he said resignedly. Decide for yourself, distrustful friend, one way or another, but I ended up here because of you, and I'll tell you more. We shall mount the scaffold together, too. He kept walking about the cell with a noiseless, springy step, the soft parts of his body enclosed in prison pajamas, bouncing slightly, and Cincinnatus, with dejected attention, followed every step of the nimble fatty. For the heck of it, I shall believe you, Cincinnatus said, finally. We'll see what will come of it. You hear me? I believe you. And to make it more convincing, I even thank you. Oh, what for? There's no need, said Monsieur Pierre, and sat down again by the table. I simply wanted you to be informed. That's fine. Now we've both got a load off our chests, haven't we? I don't know about you, but I feel like crying, and this is a good feeling. Cry. Do not restrain those salutary tears. Oh, how horrible it is here, said Cincinnatus cautiously. There's nothing horrible about it. By the way, I've wanted to reproach you for a long time about your attitude toward the life here. No, don't turn away. Allow me as a friend. You are not fair either to our good Rodion, or even more important to His Excellency, the director. All right, he is not very bright, a little pompous, something of a scatterbrain, and he is not adverse to delivering speeches. It's all true, and I myself sometimes am not in the mood for him, and of course cannot share with him my innermost thoughts, as I do with you, especially when my soul, pardon the expression, aches. But whatever faults he might have, he is a straightforward, honest, and kind man. Yes, a man of rare kindness. Do not argue. I would not say it if I did not know. And I never speak idly, and I have more experience and know life and people better than you. That's why it hurts me to see what cruel coldness, what haughty contempt you reject Roderick Ivanovich. I can sometimes read such pain in his eyes. As for Rodion, how is that you who are so intelligent and are unable to perceive through his assumed gruffiness all the touching benignity of this grown-up child. Oh, I realize that you are nervous, that you are sex-starved. Still, Cincinnatus, you'll forgive me, but it isn't right. It isn't right at all. And in general, you slight people. You scarcely touch the marvelous dinners we get here. All right, supposing you don't care for them. Believe me, I too know a little about gastronomy. But you sneer at them, and yet someone cooked them, someone worked hard. I know it sometimes gets boring here, and you feel like going for a walk or having a romp. But why think only of yourself, of your desires? Why you haven't smiled, even once, at the painstaking little jokes of dear, pathetic Roderick Ivanovitch? Perhaps he cries afterward, and does not sleep nights, remembering how you reacted. In any case, your defense is clever, said Cincinnatus, but I am none expert in dolls. I shall not yield. It's a pity, said Monsieur Pierre in a hurt tone. I ascribe it to your youth, he added after a pause. No, no, you must not be so unfair. Tell me, asked Cincinnatus, do they keep you in the dark too? The fateful churl has not arrived yet? The hacking fest isn't set for tomorrow? You should not use such words, remarked Monsieur Pierre confidentially, particularly with that intonation. There is something vulgar in it, something unworthy of a gentleman. How can you pronounce such things? I am surprised at you, but tell me when, asked Cincinnatus. In due time, Monsieur Pierre replied evasively. Why such foolish curiosity, and in general, no, you still have a lot to learn. This sort of thing won't do, this arrogance, these preconceptions. But how they drag it out, Cincinnatus said drowsily. Of course one does get accustomed to it. You hold your soul in readiness from one day to the next, and still they will take you by surprise. 10 days have passed like this, and I haven't gone crazy. And then, of course, there is always hope, indistinct as if under water, but therefore all the more attractive. You speak of escape. I surmise that there is someone else, too, who is concerned with it, certain hints. But what if this is only a deception, a fold of the fabric mimicking a human face? He sighed and paused. This is curious, said Monsieur Pierre. What are these hopes, and who is the savior? Imagination, replied Cincinnatus. And you, would you like to escape? What do you mean, escape? Where to? Asked Monsieur Pierre in amazement. Cincinnatus sighed again. What difference does it make where? We might, you and I don't know. Though whether with your build you are able to run fast, your legs. Come, what kind of nonsense is that? Said Monsieur Pierre, squirming in his chair. Only in fairy tales do people escape from prison. As for your remarks about my physique, kindly keep them to yourself. I feel sleepy, said Cincinnatus. Monsieur Pierre rolled up his right sleeve. There appeared a tattoo. Under the wonderfully white skin, his muscle bulged and rolled. He assumed a firm stance, grasped the chair with one hand, turned it upside down, and slowly began lifting it. Swaying for the effort, he held it for a moment high above his head and slowly lowered it. This was only a preliminary. Concealing its labored respiration, he wiped his hands long and carefully with a red handkerchief, while the spider, as the youngest member of the circus family, performed a simple trick above his web. Throwing in the handkerchief, Monsieur Pierre shouted a French exclamation and suddenly was standing on his hands. His spherical head gradually became suffused with beautiful rosy blood. His left trouser leg slid down, exposing his ankle. His upside-down eyes, as happens with anyone in this position, looked like the eyes of an octopus. How about that? He asked, bouncing back onto his feet and readjusting his clothes. From the corridor came a tumult of applause, and then, separately, the clown began to clap loose-jointedly as he walked, before beaning himself on the barrier. Well, repeated Monsieur Pierre, how's that for strength? And will my agility do, or haven't you seen enough yet? In one leap, Monsieur Pierre hopped on the table, stood on his hands, and grasped the back of the chair in his teeth. The music paused breathlessly. Monsieur Pierre was lifting the chair, clenched firmly between his teeth. His tense muscles were quivering, his jaw was creaking, the door softly swung open, and there entered in jackboots with a whip, powdered and spotlit with blinding violet light, the circus director. Sensational, a unique performance, he whispered, and taking off his top hat, he sat down by Cincinnatus. Something gave him. Monsieur Pierre, releasing the chair from his mouth, turned a somersault and was again standing on the floor. Apparently, however, not everything was well. He at once covered his mouth with his handkerchief, glanced quickly under the table, then inspected the chair, and suddenly seeing what he sought, attempted with a subdued oath to yank off the back of the chair its denture, which was embedded there. Magnificently displaying all its teeth, it held on with a bulldog grip, whereupon, without losing his head, Monsieur Pierre embraced the chair and departed with it. Roderick Ivanovitch, who had noticed nothing, was applauding wildly. The arena, however, remained empty. He cast a suspicious look at Cincinnatus, clapped some more, but without the former ardor, gave a little start, and in obvious distress left the box, and thus the performance ended. 11. Now newspapers were no longer brought to the cell. Having noticed that everything that might have any connections with the execution was clipped out, Cincinnatus himself had declined to receive them. Breakfast has grown simpler. Instead of chocolate, albeit weak chocolate, he would receive some salt with a flotilla of tea leaves. The toast was so hard he could not bite through it. Rodion made no secret of the fact that he had grown bored with serving the silent and fastidious prisoner. He would deliberately busy himself for a longer and longer time in the cell, his flame-red beard, the imbecile azure of his eyes, his leather apron, his claw-like hands, all this accumulated through repetition to form such a depressing, tedious impression that Cincinnati would turn away toward the wall while the cleaning was in progress. And that is how it was this day. Only the return of the chair with the deep imprints of a bulldog teeth on the top edge of its straight back served as a distinguishing feature for the day's beginning. Together with the chair, Rodion brought a note from Monsieur Pierre, fleecily curling script, elegant punctuation marks, signature like a seven-veiled dance. In jocular and kindly words, his neighbor thanked him for yesterday's friendly chat and expressed hope that it would be repeated shortly. "Let me assure you," thus ended the note, "that I am physically very, very strong," twice underlined with a ruler. "And if you are still not convinced of this, I shall be honored sometime to show you certain further interesting," underlined, "demonstrations of agility and astounding muscular development." After this, for 2 hours, with imperceptible intervals of mournful torpor, Cincinnatus, now pinching at his mustache, now flipping the pages of a book, walked about the cell. He had by now made a completely precise study of it. He knew it much better than, for instance, the room where he had lived for many years. This is how matters stood with the walls. Their number was unalterably 4. They were painted a uniform yellow, but because of the shadow covering it, the basic hue seemed dark and smooth, clay-like as it were, in comparison with the shifting hot spot where the bright ochre reflection of the window spent the day. Here in the light, all the small protuberances of the thick yellow paint were in evidence, even the wavy curve of the tracings left by the joint passage of brush hairs, and there was a familiar scratch which the precious parallelogram of sunlight would reach at 10 in the morning. A creeping, heel-clutching chill rose from the dusky stone floor. An underdeveloped, mean little echo inhabited some part of the slightly concave ceiling, with a light wire enclosed in its center. No, that is not quite in the center, a flaw that agonizingly irritated the eye, and in this sense, no less agonizing was the unsuccessful attempt to paint over the iron door. Of the 3 items of furniture, cot, table, chair, only the last was movable. The spider also moved. Up above, where the sloping window recess began, the well-nourished black beastie had found points of support for the first-rate web, with the same resourcefulness as Martha displayed when she could find, in what seemed the most unsuitable corner, a place and a method for hanging out laundry to dry. Its paws folded so that the furry elbows stuck out at the sides, and it would gaze with round hazel eyes at the hand with the pencil extended toward it, and would begin to back away, without taking its eyes off it. It was most eager, however, to take a fly or a moth from the large fingers of Rodion, and now, for example, in the southwest part of the web, there hung a butterfly's orphaned hind wing, cherry red with a silky shading, with blue lozenges along its crenellated edge. It stirred slightly in a delicate draught. The inscriptions on the walls had by now been wiped away. The list of rules likewise had disappeared. Also taken away, or perhaps broken, was the classic pitcher with Spalaean water in its resonant depths. All was bare, redoubtable, and cold in this chamber where the prison-like character was suppressed by the neutrality of a waiting room. Whether office, hospital, or some other kind, when it is already getting to be evening, and one hears only the humming in one's ears, and the horror of this waiting was somehow connected with the incorrectly located center of the ceiling. Library volumes and black shoe leather-like bindings lay on the table, which had been covered for some time already with a checkered oilcloth. The pencil, which had lost its slender length, was well chewed, rested on violently scribbled pages, stacked windmill fashion. Here also had been thrown a letter to Marthe, completed by Cincinnatus the day before, that is, the day after the interview, but he could not make up his mind to send it, and had therefore let it lie a while, as though expecting from the thing itself that fruition which his irresolute thoughts, in need of another climate, simply could not achieve. The subject will now be precious quality of Cincinnatus, his fleshy incompleteness, the fact that the greater part of him was in quite a different place, while only an insignificant portion of it was wandering perplexed here. A poor vague Cincinnatus, a comparatively stupid Cincinnatus, trusting, feeble, and foolish, as people are in their sleep. But even during this sleep, still, his real life showed through too much. Cincinnatus's face, grown transparently pallid, with fuzz on its sunken cheeks, and a mustache with such a delicate hair texture that it seemed to be actually a bit of disheveled sunlight on his upper lip. Cincinnatus's face, small and still young despite all the torments, with gliding eyes, eerie eyes of a changeable shade, was in regard to its complexion something absolutely inadmissible by the standards of his surroundings, especially now, when he had ceased to disassemble. The open shirt, the black dressing gown that kept flying open, the oversized slippers on his slender feet, the philosopher's skull cap on top of his head, and the ripple. There was a draft coming from somewhere, after all, running through in transparent hair on his temples, completed a picture, of the full indecency of which it is difficult to put into words, produced as it was of 1,000 barely noticeable overlapping trifles, of the light outline of his lips, seemingly not quite fully drawn, but with touched by a master of masters, of the fluttering movements of this empty, not yet shaded in hands, the dispersing and again glittering trays of his animated eyes, and even all this, analyzed and studied, still could not fully explain Cincinnatus. It was as if one side of his being slid into another dimension. As all the complexity of a tree's foliage passes from shade into radiance, so that you cannot distinguish just where begins the submergence into the shimmer of a different element, it seemed as though at any moment the course of his movements about the limited space of haphazardly invented cell, Cincinnatus would step in such a way as to slip naturally and effortlessly through some chink of the air into its unknown coiluses, to disappear there in the same easy smoothness with which the flashing reflection of a rotated mirror moves across every object in the room, and suddenly vanishes as if beyond the air, in some new depth of ether. At the same time, everything about him breathed with a delicate, drowsy, but in reality exceptionally strong, ardent, and independent life. His veins of bluest blue pulsated, crystal clear saliva moistened his lips, the skin quivered on his cheeks and his forehead, which was edged with dissolved light. And on all this, so teased the observer as to make him long to tear apart, cut to shreds, destroy utterly this brazen, elusive flesh, and all that it implied and expressed, all that impossible, dazzling freedom. Enough, do not walk any more, Cincinnatus. Lie down on your cot, so you will not arouse, will not irritate. In truth, Cincinnatus would become aware of the predatory eye in the peephole following him, and lie down, or sit at the table and open a book. The black pile of books on the table consisted of the following. First, a contemporary novel that Cincinnatus had not bothered to read during his period of existence at liberty. Second, one of those anthologies published in countless editions with condensed rehashes and excerpts from ancient literature. Third, bound issues of old magazine. Fourth, several bedraggled little volumes of a work in an unknown tongue brought to him by mistake. He had not ordered them. The novel was the famous Cursus by Cincinnatus, had already read a good third of it, or about 1,000 pages. Its protagonist was an oak. The novel was a big biography of that oak. At the place where Cincinnatus had stopped, the oak was just starting on its 3rd century. A simple calculation suggested by that, at the end of the book, it would reach the age of 600 at least. The idea of the novel is considered to be the acme of modern thought. Employing the gradual development of the tree, growing lone and mighty at the edge of a canyon, at whose bottom the waters never cease to din, the author unfolded all the historic events, or shadows of events, of which the oak could have been a witness. Now it was a dialogue between two warriors dismounted from their steeds, one dappled, the other dun, so as to rest under the cool seal of its noble foliage. Now highwaymen stopping by, and the song of a wild-haired fugitive damsel. Now beneath the storm's blue zigzag, the hasty passage of a lord escaping from a royal wrath. Now upon a spread cloak a corpse, still quivering with the throb of leafy shadows. Now a brief drama in the life of some villagers. There was a paragraph, a page and a half long, in which all the words began with P. It seemed as if the author were sitting with his camera somewhere among the topmost branches of the cursus, spying out and catching his prey. Various images of life would come and go, pausing among the green knuckles of light. The normal periods of inaction were filled with scientific descriptions of the oak itself, the viewpoints of dendrology, ornithology, coleopterology, mythology, or popular descriptions with touches of folk humor. Among other things was the detailed list of all the initials carved in the bark with their interpretations. Finally, no little attention was devoted to the music of waters, the palette of sunsets, the behavior of the weather. Cincinnatus read for a while and laid it aside. This work was unquestionably the best that his age had produced, yet he overcame the pages with a melancholy feeling, plodded through the pages with dull distress, and kept drowning out on the tale in the stream in his own meditation. What matters to me all this, distant, deceitful, and dead, I who am preparing to die? Or else he would begin imagining how the author, still a young man living, so they said, on the island in the North Sea, would be dying himself. And it was somehow funny that eventually the author must needs die. And it was funny because the only real, genuinely unquestionable thing here was only death itself, the inevitability of the author's physical death. The light would move along the wall. Rodion would appear with what he called Frühstück. Again, a butterfly wing would slide between his fingers, leaving colored powder on them. Can it be that he has not arrived yet? Asked Cincinnatus. It was already not the first time he had asked this question, which greedily angered Rodion, and again he did not reply. At another interview, will they grant me that? Asked Cincinnatus. In anticipation of the usual heartburn, he lay down on the cot, and turning toward the wall for a long, long time, helped patterns from it. From tiny blobs of the glossy paint and their round little shadows, he would discover, for example, a diminutive profile with a large mouse-like ear that he would loosen, was able to reconstruct it. This cold ochre smelled of the grave, and it was pimply and horrible, yet his gaze still persisted in selecting and correlating necessary little protuberances. So starved he was for even a vague semblance of a human face. Finally he turned over, lay on his back, and with the same attention began to examine the shadows and cracks on the ceiling. Anyway, they have succeeded in softening me, mused Cincinnatus. I have grown so limp and soggy that they would be able to do it with a fruit knife. For some time he sat on the edge of the cot, his hands compressed between his knees, all hunched over. Letting out a shuddering sigh, he began again to roam. It is interesting, though, in what language this is written. The small, crowded, ornate type with dots and squiggles within some sickle-shaped letters seemed to be oriental. It was somehow reminiscent of the inscriptions on museum daggers. Such old little volumes with their faded pages, some tinged with tawny blotches. The clock struck 7, and shortly Rodion appeared with dinner. You are sure he has still not come? Asked Cincinnatus. Rodion was about to leave. He turned on the threshold. Shame on you, he said with a sob in his voice. Day and night you do nothing. A body feeds you here, tends you lovingly, wears himself out for your sake, and all you do is ask stupid questions. For shame, you thankless man. Time, humming evenly, continued to pass. The air in the cell grew dark, and when it had become quite dense and dull, the light came on in business-like fashion in the center of the ceiling. No, not quite the center, that was just it. An agonizing reminder. Cincinnatus undressed and got in bed with the curses. The author was already getting to the civilized ages, to judge by the conversation of 3 merry wayfarers, Tit, Pud, and the wandering Jew, who were taking swigs of wine from their flasks on the cool moss beneath the black vespertine oak. Will no one save me? Cincinnatus suddenly asked aloud and sat up on the bed, opening his pauper's hands, showing that he had nothing. Can it be that no one will? Repeated Cincinnatus, gazing at the implacable yellowness of the walls, and still holding up his empty palms. The draught became a leafy breeze. From the dense shadows above there fell and bounced on the blanket a large dummy acorn, twice as large as life, splendidly painted, a glossy buff, and fitting its cork cup as snugly as an egg.